to come today in his absence, and we are going to chase down the Christmas story. I hope you've got a little bit of Christmas spirit left in you on this Sunday after Christmas, and we're going to do that. And if you want to go ahead and find in your Bibles Luke chapter 1, we're going to do it from Luke chapter 1 this morning. We're only going to read half a verse, so it's like you probably have got this, and you probably have seen this countless times, although I think, unless you've been to Israel, unless you've really studied the historical context and background of the text, we may have something brand new for you today of one of the most familiar stories of all. The land of the Bible has lessons to teach us about the Bible, and they are life-changing lessons. And indeed, these lessons have had such a profound impact on my life that I left Shirley Hills about 4 months ago, and we're kind of just seeing what God's going to do. I was a pastor for 27 years. I was a newspaper reporter before I became a pastor, and it's like when I got to Israel in 1999, the very first time I went, I finally found the one story that I'd been waiting for all my life. Because information from Israel is coming out of the dirt in our lifetimes. Some of the stuff I'm going to show you today, you're going to go, why haven't I ever heard this before? In fact, as I began to discover the information, I actually got ill at the pastors I'd had as a child, as a teenager. I said, man, this is interesting stuff. Why didn't you share this with me? Turns out they didn't know. Do you know most of the archaeological work in Israel has been done since 1990? I mean, it's been going on since the early 1900s, maybe some even a little before that. But the money and the ability and the technology is merging right now for a perfect storm, as you would say, of discovering more about the Bible from the land of the Bible, and that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to tell you about my ministry and what we have to offer people up front, because once we get into the presentation, I want to just let the Bible do its thing. And so here's a little bit about our ministry. First of all, I do take people to Israel. Tucker said a minute ago, we're going to go to the Holy Land. A small correction. You and I live in the Holy Land, okay? We'll take you to Israel and bring you back, but this is an incredible place where we live. And if you ever get to Israel, you're going to see what I mean by that. It's kind of a rugged place. I do take people to Israel. We've got a couple of trips coming up in May. If you'd like to join us, hey, tell somebody it's a great Christmas present. You didn't, the sweater was nice, but I want to go to Israel. Give me a trip to Israel. If you have somebody you like a lot, maybe that's something you want to do for them. If you have somebody you like kind of a lot, here's the deal. For half the price, I will leave them there. All right? So we used to offer that to churches for their pastors, but it turns out one of the churches took me up on it, and it just wasn't as funny anymore. So one of the things we do, we create tools for pastors, and that's one way Rick and I have become kind of connected, because he's interested in the technology of what I do, and it's a lot easier to show people what I do rather than tell them. So in a minute, as I do the presentation, you'll go, oh, that's what he does. But there's a brochure back on the back, a little round table, and after this time together, my daughter Melinda, one of my 3 daughters, is going to be back there, and she'll show you the information. We have trips about Israel. We'll have a brochure about our ministry. We have, this is very important, we have a little blank postcard back there. If you would like more information about our ministry on a regular basis, if you'll give me your email address, we'll send that to you. Sometimes we send free ebooks out. One of those is coming up next week. We send a picture once a day. It's called our photo of the day, and when people go to Israel, they say it's like drinking from a waterfall. And so we found that one photograph a day with a little bit of information about it is a good way to start gaining knowledge in a way that people can handle it. So all you have to do is give me your email address and your name. We'll send that to you. We don't do anything else with the mailing list, but that's for that. And we have a book that was released nationally by Kriegel Publications up in Michigan. Now it's being released internationally by a group called the Friends of Israel. Some of you may have even heard of Friends of Israel, but they've been around since 1938, and that's important because the state of Israel was founded in 1948, and in 1938 this group was called the Friends of Israel, and so to have any kind of connection with them is a real honor for me. And this book's called Secrets from the Ancient Path. Years ago, when I first started writing books, my publishers at Kriegel said, you want to write to people who are hurting. You will never run out of an audience if you'll write to people who are hurting. So I always remember that. And then he said, second of all, you want to write to women. And that threw me. I said, write to women. Why do I want to write for women? He said, because women buy books. I said, I buy books. I'm a man. He said, you're the exception. Trust me, women buy books. And I said, what if I want men to read my books too? He said, well, in that case, you want to include pictures. So we have pictures on every page. And we've sold a lot of these books. And so if you like the information I'm sharing here, if that intrigues you, and it doesn't connect with everybody, but a lot of people it does, this is a good place to start. And our website, experienceisrael.com, experienceisraelnow.com, experienceisraelnow.com has a little tab on it that says reading list, because a lot of times people say, wow, where did you learn all that stuff? Or where could I start reading? I've put my favorite books, not the ones I've written, but the books that have meant a lot to me, and some video resources on our website. And so we're here to kind of serve you and get connected. And today we're going to chase down the King of Bethlehem. Now, Luke chapter 1, if you're into Bible study, the first 4 verses of Luke are something called the introduction, where Luke says, I'm going to write an orderly account. A lot of people are telling the story of Jesus. I'm going to write an orderly account. Luke never met Jesus, not physically. Remember, he's a Greek. He was not one of the disciples. He's the only non-Jewish writer in the Gospels, maybe the only non-Jewish writer in the entire New Testament. I'd have to double check some of that. But Luke, I think, acted like a reporter. When he got hooked up with Paul, and he heard the story of Jesus, and Paul's in prison for 2 years, and Luke's definitely with him during that period. I think he just went over to the Sea of Galilee, which is a lake, and he asked questions, and I think he wandered down to Bethlehem. And think about it, Luke chapter 2 is the Christmas story. If he had not given us that, we would have only had Matthew's version, because Mark and John didn't start with the beginning. So we owe a lot to Luke, however he got his information. But I'd like you to notice how he begins the entire presentation, not only of the Christmas story, but of his account. So, okay, he says, this is me, my name is Luke, I'm going to write an orderly account. And then verse 5, he says, let's start. And he says, in the time of Herod, king of Judea, and that's all I want to read. In the time of Herod, king of Judea. If you want to check something out, go to Matthew chapter 2, and you will see almost exactly the same phrase. In Matthew chapter 1, you get this genealogy as Matthew gets started. So he's very Jewish. He was a disciple. And so he comes at this thing from the genealogy. That's the way a Jewish person would do. And then he tells a little bit about, what we would call the Christmas story in chapter 1. But in chapter 2, it's really, really serious. And he says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem while Herod was king. So the only 2 accounts of the Christmas story both tell us that Herod was king. And here's this beautiful nativity set and your beautiful Christmas story that we've known for years and years and years. And Herod's nowhere here. But I promise you, the fact that Herod was king of Judea is going to change the Christmas story for you. For me, if you don't know his story. So let's go to Israel. It's not the Holy Land, it's Israel. And we will start from the Holy Land and go to Israel. Do you recognize this? Maybe we could run outside and wave. No, it's too late. Sorry. So we're going to travel by Google. Now, if you've ever traveled overseas, or if you ever go with me to Israel, you'll know this is a much better way to fly to Israel than to actually get on a plane. That's the worst part of the trip, is going to Israel. And people always say, is it safe? I don't know. A lot of times we change planes in New York City. But once we see New York City in the rearview mirror, we start to relax, because we're going to one of the safest places in the world, Israel. I guess you saw our country's full of green. That means we had a lot of water. The Middle East may have a lot of oil, but it doesn't have a lot of water. And over the centuries, travel has, by necessity, used Israel as the major highway between Europe, Asia, and Africa. And a lot of the verses in the Bible will have to do with something with water. A thirst for you, the way the deer pants for water. Jesus would use the phrase of living water. That's a whole nother lesson. But just for the moment, I want you to see that the land of the Bible is not some out of the way, in the middle of nowhere place where this obscure story happened and nobody would have ever heard about it. Why in the world would God choose a place like that? It's just the opposite. If you don't have air travel, you could travel by boat, but it's very, very dangerous in that era. You could ship your goods by boat, but it's winner take all. If the ship sinks, you've lost everything. And so the land travel that was so important, going from Egypt to Asia, or even from Europe around to Egypt to this part of the world, Israel becomes the world's most important highway. This was the crossroads of the world of that day. God did not hide the story of what he was doing. He put it in the center of civilization. He wanted everybody to see what was going on. Now we're going to go to Christmas. So let's go to Bethlehem. We're going to either be in Nazareth or Bethlehem, because that's where the Christmas story happened. Except for Luke and Matthew saying, let's start with the fact that the political situation in Israel was that Herod was king of Judea. And to be fair, if we wrote either one of those men a letter about this particular Sunday morning, about how we came to church, they're going to have to even do the homework on what a church is. And if I mention I came on the interstate highway and for the first time in several days, the traffic was light, they don't know about cars, they don't know about interstate highways, they're going to have to do their homework. You get to Bethlehem, and what you basically get when you get there is a church. And it's a very old church. It comes out of the Greek and Russian Orthodox tradition, even the Egyptian Coptic tradition, which means, to put it in plain language, it's not normal to us. It doesn't look anything like this gathering or most any other gathering in Middle Georgia. It's old. This is one of the oldest church buildings in the world. I mean, it's about 1,700 years old. You can't get older than Jesus. So, that's 2,000 years. So that's pretty impressive. A lot of gold, a lot of ornate decorations, a lot of something we call icons. You'll see them on the wall. An icon has gold and silver, might even have a diamond necklace on it or pearls wrapped around it, just like this one. This is the mother and the child. And look at how people who've grown up in this tradition revere even the icons. They connect with it. I don't connect with it. They connect with it. How you come to Jesus, I don't really care as long as you come to Jesus. But the reason we would ever go into Bethlehem is to go down into this little area. It's like a little basement. And this lady is putting some things on the very spot where it is said Jesus was born. But as you noticed, it was very hard to tell that was a cave. Didn't look anything like a cave. They've put rugs on the walls. They've hidden everything that has the appearance of a cave. And so we're going to go next door to the newer Catholic Church and go down below the Catholic Church, because at least they have left enough of the cave around that you can tell it is a cave. And if you've not heard this before, hear it now. Jesus was born in a cave. He was not born in a New England barn with snow on the ground and Americans riding in a sleigh singing jingle bells. I know your Christmas card said that, and it's a beautiful picture. But he was born in a cave. The caves were everywhere around Bethlehem. Shepherds used them to put their animals in if the weather was bad or they just wanted to camp out. Families in Bethlehem had homes, of course, and a lot of times they would back up. It's very hilly. This is at the top of the Judean mountain ridge. So it's very hilly, and they might back their home up to a rock wall of some kind. Now, a young couple starts out starts in their family, and just like in our families, the wonderful news comes that his wife is expecting, and so now he's got 9 months to figure out how to handle this growing family. One of the easiest ways to do is walk over to the rock wall and start knocking out a room. It's limestone rock. As rock goes, it's pretty soft. It's still rock, but it's pretty soft. And he's got 9 months. And he's got no TV. So he's going to carve out a room. And now they have an extra room for this child. And maybe a couple of years later they're expecting again, and he can either make that room larger, or he can go over here to this side and make another room. And in Bethlehem, this became kind of a little side business because eventually the children leave home. Isn't that true? Got any empty nesters in here? God bless the empty nest, you know. It's every stage of life. I have a daughter here. She's moved on, and we love her for that. You know, she's an adult. You know, that's what you train them to do, is to leave and go do your own thing. And then, in our case, as the children go off, they also tend to get married, and then they bring back more people with them. And we have 3 wonderful grandchildren now, and for twice now during the holiday season, we've had everybody in the house. So here we have a house. Let's picture me in Bethlehem, except I'm just right over here in Peach County. You know, we have a house that we've enlarged through the years because of our own family. And then all of a sudden everybody leaves. And during the holiday season, it's not uncommon for everybody to come back. And so we've designed our house where we can close up the part we don't use unless the holiday comes, and then we can use it. Do you know what that's called in Bethlehem? An inn. That's all it is. It's not a business there that had, you know, rooms and a swimming pool outside. Bethlehem's only 5 miles from Jerusalem. And so when, seriously, 500, 600, 800,000 people show up in Jerusalem for, say, Passover, some of that spillover traffic is going to wind up in little suburban towns, little villages like Bethlehem. And so people booked out their rooms. You know, they rented out their rooms. That's an inn. Well, this is Manger Square, and I promise you this was about the king of Bethlehem. So let's talk about Herod for a minute. Not very far from Bethlehem, a little bit of a hike, but you could be there in an hour and a half, is this unusual shaped hill. This is Manger Square. You can see what looks like a volcano from Manger Square. Now, that's the ruins. One of the things you have to do when you go to Israel or any other place where there are ancient buildings is you have to see what's not there anymore. We're getting this building in its prime condition with the electricity working and with sheetrock and paint and carpet. Well, if a tornado came through here and nobody ever did anything, in a few years you would have to come find the foundation and figure out what once stood here. And that's what we're looking at here. That was a swimming pool, by the way. Twice as large as an Olympic pool. Herod had down at the bottom of what he called the Herodium. It was his largest palace. It was his favorite palace. He wanted to be buried here, and he was. Again, you have to see what's not there anymore, and this artist's rendition tells us that this tower went up another 6 stories beyond what we can see today. This palace was so large it had room for lodging for 1,000 soldiers. It could keep enough food there and water for years and years and years of supply. Herod was a very paranoid king. Herod was very powerful. He was king of all Judea. He was connected with the Roman emperor. He was friends with Cleopatra, which was a nerve-wracking friendship, you know, because this was a bloodthirsty environment at that level. Everybody was after you, because if they could kill you, then they could become the king and have all that power and live in a place like the Herodium. Herod wanted to recreate the Garden of Eden everywhere he was. And so while we see nothing but rocks here, if you could picture an amazing little oasis, a man-made garden kind of area up here. And remember, there's almost no water in this part of the world. He's built aqueducts to bring it in from the streams of Jerusalem, and that's how he gets the water for his swimming pool. This is one of the things. I told you most of the archaeological work in Israel has been done since 1990. A man named Josephus is a historian of great importance to us. Josephus was a Jewish general who led part of the revolt of the Jews in the year 68. Now remember, Jesus died somewhere around the year 30. So just to give you a time frame, in 68 there was this huge revolt. And for a brief season, Israel actually was gaining its independence. Well, Rome is not going to handle that well, and they fought like crazy, and they brought in amazing armies. Josephus was captured by the Romans, but instead of killing the general, they began to use him, and he wrote down a lot of history of this era. So he's very important as being an outside the Bible source about Jewish history. He said Herod was buried at the Herodium. Jesus was born. Herod was alive, but right after Jesus was born, Herod died. I don't know how long it was. Could have been a few months, might have been as much as 3 years. But it wasn't long. We know from Josephus that Herod's favorite palace was the Herodium, that he spent a lot of time in the last years here, but I don't know if Herod was in this largest palace when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Picture Jesus here, Herod way up on the hill. I can't tell you that he was there, but the palace was there, and the symbolism is powerful. Look at the parallel. Now, Josephus said he was buried here. For years, scholars said Josephus probably got a lot of things wrong. This is obviously one of the things wrong. We found the Herodium. We've looked all over. There's no signs of any tomb anywhere. Until 2007, 2008, a man named Ehud Netzer, who kept looking, he was convinced it was there, he finally uncovered the remains of the sarcophagus of Herod. Very elaborate. It had been intentionally covered up, and the sarcophagus had been broken many, many times. In fact, some of it had been ground into powder. Oh, what difference does that make to us? Well, we live in a time when a lot of people are going to tell you the Bible you can't believe the Bible. Literally true. Are you kidding me? You can't do that. I mean, it's an ancient book. It's full of fables and stuff like this. All right, one of the fables, they say, is that Herod killed the children of Bethlehem. Herod killed the infants of that surrounding area. And one of the reasons they say it's a fable is there's no outside reference to it. I want to give you just some common sense for a minute. Herod killed everybody that was close to him if he felt like they were a threat to him. He killed so many of his own family members. The Roman emperor once said, knowing that Herod still kept the Jewish diet, he was technically Jewish, the emperor once said, it'd be safer to be Herod's pig, he doesn't eat pork, than to be one of his sons. Because he had killed multiples of his sons. He had 10 wives. His favorite wife was named Miriam. He had 2 wives named Miriam. And so one of them had a name tag. I'm number 1, Miriam. He loved her so much that he was paranoid somebody was going to seduce her when he was away on business, that she was going to have an affair. And he might have had reason for that, actually. If you were married to Herod, he solved the problem. He came home and he had her executed. He loved her to death, as they say. He grieved for her the rest of his life. He never got over it. He missed her so much. The guy was crazy. When he was near death, one of his servants leaned over to him and said, "What a pity." The servant wasn't being nice. "What a pity that when Herod dies, no one will grieve." Just stick the dagger in just a little bit, Dying man. Unfortunately for that servant, Herod rallied from that illness. And then he made a decision. And he made an announcement. He sent out a decree that in every community, the military force was to take whoever the favorite citizens were in that community. I don't know who it might be. It might be Pastor Rick. He's not here, so let's just designate him, okay? So Pastor Rick, we designate him and maybe the mayor of Perry and the teacher of the year from the local high school. Put them into holding, like in jail. And when the announcement comes that Herod has died, I want all of those people put to death, and there will be grief in Israel upon hearing that Herod has died. That's who we're dealing with here. Thankfully, when he died, and I'm sure they checked 2 or 3 times to make sure he was not going to come back, his sons did not carry out that decree. And people were set free. But what a nerve-wracking time. I want to ask you something. Why would killing a few innocent children in some villages that had no communication with the rest of the world ever make the news anyway? But if it were your grandchildren, I have three grandchildren now, and they are precious to us, and one of them's very young and very innocent. If someone from this era of ours were to somehow kill one of those children, I am marking my time. I don't know what I can do to ever do something about that. But if this community also wants to honor the man who has killed one of my children or grandchildren, if I ever get the chance, I will at least make sure the statue you built of him is torn down. And see, the Herodium overlooking Bethlehem had this huge tomb-like thing shining over it to remind Bethlehem, this is Herod the Great. And in AD 68, when that revolt started, instead of taking the Herodium as a military fortress, the people of Bethlehem and the surrounding villages went to the top, tore down the tower, and they took the sarcophagus and their sledgehammers and they broke it into pieces and ground some of it into powder. I'm telling you, I have never been that motivated to go over to a cemetery and do anything like that. But if you had killed one of my children, I guess, and that's all I could do, yeah. They didn't want to see it anymore. They'd rather destroy the Herodium than use it. Where in the world did Herod get the idea that you could build a mountain? And he built that mountain. It was not a natural mountain. They built it, and we're flying past it again. Where did he get the idea that you could either build a mountain and put a palace on it, or take an existing mountain and make a palace out of it? Because that's a little unusual, right? Let's go to Jordan. Herod's father was from Edom. He was an Edomite, but his mother was a Nabatean, and the capital of the Nabatean Empire was Petra. I don't know if you've ever been to Petra, but you've probably seen pictures of Petra. It's appeared in many movies, including the finale of the Raiders of the Lost Ark trilogy with Harrison Ford and that kind of thing. So maybe you'll recognize some of this stuff. But long before we started making movies here, this was actually an amazing city, the capital of the Nabatean Empire. The Herodian family made their money off of the spice trade. Petra was a hidden city along the hidden trails of the spice routes. This is very dangerous to carry the spices from one place to another. These are very, very expensive. It's like carrying little packets of gold. And so the trails were hidden. And this city was hidden. Because if you attack a camel caravan with people carrying these spices, it wouldn't be much to overwhelm them, and then you've got this enormous wealth. It's like knocking off the train with the payroll in it in old Wild West. But Petra was a city where you took these existing rocks and you made houses out of them. And when Herod was a boy, his father became worried about his family's safety, and for a season of time, he sent them with their mother to Petra, and this is part of Herod's growing up experience. Wherever you grew up, the house you lived in with your parents or with your grandparents or whoever you lived in became, in your mind, a place that would be normal for you to live when you grew up. For me, it was 2 bedrooms, maybe 3 when we converted the den, and a bath and a half, and a front porch screened in because of the gnats, But guess what? I live in a house that it's larger than that, but it basically has the same elements, right down to the porch with the screen on it. Well, this was Herod's neighborhood, the richest neighborhood in the world. And he got the idea as a boy that it is right and normal for our family to have more money than all the other families combined. It is right and normal to take a mountain and just make a house out of it. It's right and normal for me to live in the best palace possible. And so he built a lot of them as he grew up and as he gained the resources. Again, his family has a monopoly on the spice trade, things like frankincense and myrrh. They own the natural resources. They own the recipe. They own the factories that produce them. And they drove the price just as high as it would go and held it there and became insanely wealthy. These are some of the palaces that Herod had. Maybe as many as 12. We know of at least 9. One way over on the coast. Here's Masada, and we're looking from Petra now. Machaerus. 3 palaces in Jericho, 1 in Jerusalem. Of course, we just saw the one in the Herodium. The point is, Herod could run in any direction wherever the enemy came from, because all of his palaces were also fortresses. Again, he's very paranoid that somebody's going to kill him, and so he builds these fortresses and he hides there. He had a palace on this is Masada, on this north end, also on the south end, north end, south end. By the way, just a quick note: see the trail that goes up there, the snake path? That's a hiking trail, and then the little thing at the top, that's a tram station. So if you ever go with me on a tour of Israel, we're going to ask you to choose a traditional tour or a hiking tour. The traditional tour rides the tram. The hiking tour, you figure it out, okay? So that's kind of the difference. And don't forget that when you're here, it's probably going to be more than 100 degrees, because we are at the bottom of the earth. This is the Dead Sea region, and this was Herod's. Herod had, again, 2 palaces here, not just one. Now, anything below a black line that you see is original. And I know it looks like a bunch of rocks, but this has survived 2,000 years. And I want you to look. They had plaster on the walls and paint on the plaster. This is 2,000 years old. Imagine what it looked like in its heyday. And so, again, you have to see what's not there anymore. And these walls, you can see even some of the plaster that's lost all of its color, but you can still see it on some of the walls. These are food storage areas. This is a spa that Herod designed so he could have something that you would find in Greece maybe. And he's got it up here on this mountain in by the way, that's a mikvah. We would call it a baptistry. He had Jewish people working for him, and some of them would want to be washed so they could be in a right relationship with God. We did not invent baptism. Jesus adopted it as a part of what it is to follow him. But they've been using water as symbolic cleansing for a long time. Herod did not have any slaves build this palace or any of the others. He paid for all of the work to be done. He was the national economy. There is projection that he had easily more money than the rest of the nation put together. Now, I have a question for you, and we're in a small enough room. If you want to offer an answer, that's fine. How do you think Herod himself got to the top of Masada? He had no tram. How do you think he got up there? What? I didn't hear it. A donkey? No. Camel? No. Anybody think he carried him? They carried him up there? That kind of makes sense. He ran up Masada. See, the image we automatically think about somebody like Herod, so self-centered and whatnot, is probably overweight, arrogant. Oh, he was arrogant. But Herod was actually an Olympic athlete. Yeah. And he would race his soldiers up Masada. By the way, sometimes soldiers in Israel today still run up that way. The fastest I've ever been up there is 35 minutes. And we were blistering. It was a walking path. But to see somebody run up there, it's just amazing, especially when it's so hot. The Olympic Games, the first Olympic Games, the original Olympic Games, got into financial trouble. It's funny. They've had that tradition these days too. And they were almost going to have to cancel them. Herod had so much money, he personally bailed out the Olympic Games. And in exchange, they let him participate. He was a sprinter and a boxer. Now, I'd put an asterisk by anything he won. As a matter of fact, he probably won most of the races up Masada. Would you beat him? Come on. And I'm gonna fall at the last second, whatever. What a house! What an incredible collection of buildings. And one quick look at one more place, because sometimes Herod didn't just build a palace on a rock. Sometimes he would build an entire city. And so we'll just take a real quick look at Caesarea by the ocean. There's also Caesarea Philippi. That's a whole nother lesson. We'll do that one day. Caesarea by the ocean, by the Mediterranean, is an entire city that Herod had built. And this stadium, again, I told you most of the archaeological work has been done in recent years. This stadium was underneath the sand when I was born, and I am not all that terribly old. But now this stadium is being used for concerts as it overlooks the Mediterranean. Do you know the Bible says in the last days the ancient cities of Israel are going to come back to life? This is one of your examples, and they're all over Israel. Now, Herod's palace in Caesarea is right over there, and it juts out into the water. So that large building juts out into water, and this is where it juts out into water. And this tile is left over from the time of Herod. And look at that. You realize what that is? It's a swimming pool that was projected out into the ocean. Wouldn't that be cool? Maybe your timeshare's got something, where you can go to a place like this, clean it up a little bit. But I'm thinking that'd be such a nice place to vacation. This is the aqueduct, one of the 3 aqueducts that brought water from the nearby Carmel mountain range, about 17 miles away, because again, they didn't have any fresh water. Herod figured out that they could have even a sewage system, a modern sewage system by the high tide would just come in underneath the city and wash out all the debris into the ocean. That's one reason he built a swimming pool. Who wants to go swim in the ocean if you're using it like a giant toilet for your city? But anyway, that's Caesarea. Now, let's just sum up Herod's life for a minute. He's powerful. He's insanely wealthy. He's very self-centered. His family really pays no attention to the people around them who are everywhere suffering. All they really want is more stuff. And so while the emperor of Rome has one palace, Herod builds 9, maybe even 10, 11, or 12 of them in a very small place. Israel's very small. You could fit 6.5 of them in the state of Georgia. Very small. And yet he had palaces everywhere. It's why, and I really hate to say this because I have to admit that I'm part of that materialistic culture, but Herod and his family might be the most American family in the Bible. Seriously. And Luke and Matthew wanted you to see the parallel of how Jesus came into the world by first saying, hey, don't forget who's dominating this culture. Well, let's go find the Christmas story, the one we know. It starts in Nazareth, and Nazareth's a lot like Bethlehem, 65,000 people in both cities. Basically, when you get through the traffic jam and you finally get to where you go and all you got is a church. And so I try not to take people into either Bethlehem or Nazareth. We find something else that's more like the Bible on my tours, and we leave the churches alone. But there's the church where Mary is said to have gotten the news that that she was going to be the mother of the Christ child. It's what we call a traditional site. Anytime your guide says a traditional site, you want to ask your guide, okay, by tradition, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do we know that this is actually the place? That church in Bethlehem where the star is and marks the place where Jesus is born, that's like an 8 or a 9. It's probably the place. It didn't look like that, but it's probably the place. This is more like a 0. And so that's one of the reasons. It's a pretty church, but we don't go all the way across the ocean to see churches. We got churches here. Instead, we might go to the Nazareth village, which is a nice place right inside the city limits of Nazareth. Arab Christians, a lot of Arab Christians in Nazareth, and these happen to be evangelical believers. So they've built a city to let us remember that when Jesus grew up in Nazareth, when Mary and Joseph were living in Nazareth, it was a small place, maybe 200 to 400 people. The tools for carpenters were very rudimentary. The tools for everything very rudimentary. Their tax rate was about 50%, and then they were expected to give a tithe to the temple. These people had almost nothing, and if it didn't rain or they had a bad crop, they're depending on the generosity of one another to get their living. Herod had everything. These people have almost nothing. And it's going to be like that for the next 2 million people that you will see in Bible times living in Israel. And that was about the population. So you had one man who had everything and everybody else could barely survive. The only way you might be able to pull it off is to work with the Romans, maybe be a tax collector or something, and then you would at least have enough money. The synagogue was a place where they would have school, they would have worship, they would have meetings and whatnot. And if you've ever wondered what Mary looked like, this is about as close as I can take you. It's the right skin complexion, it's the right facial features, it's the right age, very young. Which brings me to a question. What in the world can somebody who maybe is 14, 15 years old, what in the world could she have possibly done by this time in her life that would get the attention of God so that God would use her in a powerful way? The answer is nothing. When you're 8, 9, 10 years old, there's nothing you could have done that would have, like God said, wow, look at that one. Woo. You know? Except for one thing. And There was this preacher years ago, and I don't know how old I was, but I was old enough to be listening in a church service like this. And the preacher put a blank sheet of paper down on our altar. And he said, here's the way it works. This is your contract with God. And what God would like you to do is sign your name at the bottom of it, even though you know it's a blank sheet of paper. What God wants to know is, will you sign your name to the bottom of this sheet and let me fill in the details later? Mary was the kind of person, Joseph too, who would sign that paper. It cost her. It cost her a lot. People didn't believe her. She had to travel a lot. She didn't have good family support. She winds up with this pregnancy that is explained by a dream at best, and no one's believing it, except Joseph, because an angel came to him too, Did you know Mary made the trip we're about to see 3 times in her pregnancy? As a sign that God can do anything, the angel said, if you'll go to see your cousin, you'll find that she's expecting. And everybody said, she's way too old to be expecting. And so she did. She traveled from Nazareth down the Jordan River Valley. She went to Jericho, and then she went up to the Jerusalem area, and then a suburb just west of Jerusalem is where John the Baptist was born. So we know she made that trip early in her pregnancy. 3 months later, she came back after that baby was born, and she stays in Nazareth, obviously showing a lot more than she was, and probably enduring who knows what kind of scorn. And she and Joseph, right toward the end, he has not left her, have to go to Bethlehem because of this tax filing thing. So they walk again, and she's 9 months. And they get down to Jericho, and now they're going to leave Jericho and go up toward the Jerusalem and Bethlehem area. And again, they've made this trip many times as children. Their families were obviously the kind of families that would go to something like Passover. They make this journey. It's about 18 miles to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem. And there's not a tree between Jericho and Bethlehem. Even in the spring, it's going to be very, very warm. Different times of the year, the hottest I've ever been there is 117. You can be dehydrated within an hour. You got to take your own water, and you got to take a lot of it. You got to take your own food. If you're going to need medical help, you've either got to go back to Jericho or make it all the way to your destination. There's really nothing in between. This is the frightening territory that Jesus used as the setting for the story of the Good Samaritan. Everybody knew how frightening this road was, how difficult it was. And the only reason Mary and Joseph would bring their family here every year for Passover is that God invited them to worship. Can you imagine walking even a mile through this? This is 18 miles, and it's only part of the 70, 75-mile journey that they had to make. And the only reason they came this way is because God asked them to come. I mean, this is so incredibly difficult. It's almost as hard as having to get up on a Sunday morning and make it over to the Vine by 10 a.m. That was preacher humor, but you'll get it later. Yeah, this is what they did just to get to Bethlehem. You know that blank sheet of paper that she signed? I wonder if she envisioned it being this tough. And every year she makes this journey. Luke's last line of the Christmas story is about Jesus growing up, and they lost him, and they came back and they got him, and they go, and they said every year they went to Passover in Jerusalem as a family. So they did this trip a lot. And we know Mary kept up the practice because when she's considerably older, Jesus is somewhere around 33, she's in Jerusalem again, one more year for Passover. She did not go for the crucifixion, but she wakes up on that incredibly difficult morning and hears that her son's been arrested. He's been falsely tried. They've tortured him almost to death, and now he's up on a stick, and he's going to bleed out in front of her and the rest of the community. And I am thinking that if anybody in the world is ever going to get a pass from that kind of pain, maybe it would be the mother of God's Son. And it's not really the Christmas lesson today, but it may be why we came together for someone here who's going through something very, very difficult. Well, maybe you need to hear Mary's message. from that particular Passover. And that is, no matter what happens, no matter how bad it looks, no matter how much it hurts, do not leave town or give up hope before the story is over. Because death's not the end of the story. That's the beauty of why we celebrate at Christmas or at Easter. God loves us enough. He came to us. He didn't come to this church, I know that. Let's go outside Bethlehem, and this is where we'll end. We'll go outside Bethlehem just to try to find what a cave looks like out in the shepherd's fields. In 2012, when we went on this television tour, and we were doing a lot of filming, we finally got a guy to understand we didn't want to go to the church, and so he took us out here, and lo and behold, there were shepherds watching their sheep all around this cave that he knew about. And I thought that's just God's hand. And so we go in this cave, and I had to clean it out, kind of like Joseph did. I want you to look at the rocks around me and how it's a little elevated right where I am. And the rocks are there for a purpose. If you're a shepherd and it starts raining and it's cold and you bring your flock inside a little bit, as the human being of this, you want the warmest place possible. And you also want a place that's not covered up with sheep and goats and all of their paraphernalia that they bring with them. Some of you keep livestock. You're starting to go where I'm going, okay? I mean, how do you politely broach the subject of animal? Well, there's a reason this grass is green, okay? And that cinnamon candle that you bring out every Christmas, I promise you that's not the smell of Christmas that I found in that cave right there. So the shepherds always kept a place elevated, not even this high, maybe about this high, off the ground level. And they put rocks around it so the sheep and the goats would stay down. And that's where they laid down to go to sleep. That's where they had their food. It's still filthy. Still filthy. That's where, if you had an emergency, I guess you could lay down and have a baby. And that's what happened. Not in this cave, of course, but in one of the caves where nobody was staying, out there where the shepherds were, Jesus was born. And if you could go outside this cave, if we were there right now, we could go out this cave, walk up the hill, and as you top that next ridge, you can see the Herodium. And so you could, maybe like one of the Magi did at some point, come walking along the roads of Bethlehem and say, hey, do you know where the king is? We've come to see the king. And anybody there could have told you, well, see that big hill over there? It looks, it's got the flat top and the tower. That's where the king is. But you don't want to go over there. That's very dangerous. And there are probably hundreds of soldiers going to keep you away anyway. Why in the world would you want to see the king of Bethlehem? Well, no. You misunderstood me. I didn't want to see the king of Bethlehem. I want to see the King of Kings. Oh. Well, if you want to see the king, that king, then come. Everybody's welcome here. There's no door. Even the shepherds have been to see this king. So you're welcome. See, this is the message of Christmas. You just come. He wants to be with us so much, that's Emmanuel, that he came, and he came in such a way that no one would ever be turned away. Now, a lot of what I do is education. Some of it's once in a while entertaining, and it's very visual. But we didn't come here just to be entertained or to learn a little more about the Bible story. So I'm going to leave you with an application point that would have been better about a month ago than it is today, since we're past Christmas. But it's a very important message for people who say they are following this king and not the king of Bethlehem. And that is this: we live in a very materialistic, very Herodian type culture, do we not? I mean, Christmas has turned even from in my lifetime, has turned into huge business. Business in America depends on Christmas, the birthday of Jesus, to turn a profit. And somehow, as followers of Jesus, most of us have bought into that idea, and we're celebrating Christmas these days in a way that Herod would love and Jesus would not recognize. And the question is, what are we going to do about that? This is more dangerous than maybe we're willing to even look at. Jesus is born just below the Herodium. Herod dies. 3 of his sons take over. So Herod Antipas moves up to the north where he's going to be in the Galilee region. And he lives in a brand new city like his father. He's going to build a city. It's called the Sepphoris. You know where it's next to? Nazareth. And Jesus is a carpenter, and they're building a new city over here. And Luke chapter 8 says he met some women, and they traveled with Jesus once in a while, and they financially supported him. And one of them was the wife of the city manager of Sepphoris. So we think Jesus had some connections there. But the point is, he's born with Herod the Great. He grows up next to Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas tires of Sepphoris, so he moves over to the Sea of Galilee in Tiberias and builds a new palace there about the same time Jesus moves to Capernaum. They're always side by side. Until finally one day they meet in Jerusalem on the day Jesus died. And Jesus won't say a word to him. Carry on a full conversation with Pilate. He'll talk to a thief on the cross, but he will not say anything to the most American family in the Bible. And that troubles me. So, here's what we've done with this in our house. We still give gifts. I love gifts. I told my wife, she heard this presentation several times, don't assume because I'm saying this that I don't want toys for Christmas. Of course I want toys for Christmas, you know? And so, but the thing is, we're influencing that next level in our family. So we want our grandchildren to know that when Grandma and when Mimi and Granddaddy give you a present, it's because we're celebrating a birthday. And my wife did this whole Advent thing this year that was personalized, and so for the 24 days before Christmas, we were FaceTiming with them. Here's the deal: with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors, you got to figure out a way to step away from the very materialistic culture we're in, and find a way to live your life in such a way that by the end of your life and before it, people kind of, when they talk about you, the one thing they'll say, whether they say it out loud or not, is, man, that lady, that man, they love Jesus. They're all about Jesus. They're the most generous people I know. I love being around them. And that's the lesson of Christmas too. It's come because you're welcome, and it's to live the way he would live. And that's going to be in direct contrast to the way Herod would live. Well, I hope you get that. And if you'd like to talk more about it, I'm going to be around here for a little while, and we've got some more resources for you. But right now, I'd just like to pray for us. Tucker's going to come and lead us in a